Restaking is such a big hype in the Ethereum ecosystem, but it's actually an idea that has been taken from different ecosystems, right? Whether it's from Polkadot, Cosmos, wherever it comes from. These two ecosystems have always been at the forefront of technology and building.
Liquid staking, a topic that has gotten a lot of attention recently with projects like Eigenlayer launching, which raised more than $100 million from investors, and their application has received more than $12 billion in value from users locking their tokens in Eigenlayer. So what is liquid staking? Why is it a major narrative in crypto today? And what are the risks? And how can you benefit from all this? We got two experts on the show today from projects that deal with liquid staking, but they're from different ecosystems. One is Persistence One, an app chain in the Cosmos ecosystem, and the other is Bifrost, a parachain on Polkadot. Do not miss this episode, stay tuned and follow us. All right, thank you for tuning into the TEACHMEDEFI podcast. My name is Sohail, and today we have two guests on the show, and we will have a chat that kind of crosses ecosystem borders between Polkadot and Cosmos, which I'm excited about. We got Thibault here from Bifrost, an app chain or parachain on Polkadot, and we got Mikhil from Persistence One, which is an app chain in the Cosmos ecosystem. Hi, guys.
Hello.
Hey, Sohail.
Sweet. Lovely to have you guys on. And yeah, I mean, maybe to start it off with, your projects are kind of, well, they may be based in different ecosystems, but they have things in common. Both of them deal with liquid staking, among other things. So yeah, I thought it would be interesting if we do a joint episode and get like several perspectives on this topic. Perhaps we can also chat about like closely related things such as restaking with the whole Eigenlayer thing that's going on. So yeah, just maybe to kick it off, let's say if you imagine explaining liquid staking, which can be a bit confusing at first, to a 10-year-old, let's say, how would you describe it? And perhaps Mikhil, you go first, and Thibault can jump in after.
Thankfully, no 10-year-old has asked me this question. Because it is
well, they might. They're getting very financially literate in the Web3 age.
They are indeed. I would say, staking, if you're aware of staking, I'm assuming this 10-year-old is aware of staking as a concept.
Yes.
I think staking has certain limitations. It creates certain problems. So when you stake your assets, you end up locking those assets on the blockchain. And, those assets are then used to participate in network consensus, governance, whatever, right? Like you earn some staking rewards for using your assets to do something with it. So you're staking it, and it's doing something in the background to give you some rewards. Those rewards can come from different places. We don't need to go into those things, but to earn those rewards, you essentially end up locking your assets, which is never a great thing, because in crypto you need liquidity at all times. When you stake your assets, it gets locked up. When you choose to withdraw, it takes a certain amount of time. This is called the unbonding period or the cool off period. So if Sohail, you decide to stake 100 atom today, and you not dot, you prefer atom in this example. I'm just kidding, but
oh, you're starting already.
if you decide to stake 100 atoms today, and you see that atom is mooning and it's at $40 in a week, and you're like, okay, I need to sell this, you cannot do it because you'll have to wait for 21 days to get your assets back, and then you sell it. So to tackle this problem of the unbonding period, you can liquid stake your tokens. So instead of staking it natively on the chain, you use a liquid staking application or a liquid staking protocol provider to stake your assets. So you deposit your atom into pstake, and pstake will issue you a liquid stake token, which is like a receipt. It's like a valet ticket where you get this some new token which is equivalent to your 100 atom deposits. And this new token, you can just send it, or you can just give it to somebody else, right? You can hand it off to Thibault, or when Thibault wants, let's say, so Thibault is going to give you 40 atom of $40 worth of atom for one atom, that one liquid staked atom that you give to him, whatever that looks like, right? The exchange rate. So that's liquid staking in very short.
Right. Thibault, anything to add from your side?
Yeah, I think as Mikel was saying, hopefully the 10-year-old is a degen, buying meme coins and messing around on chains. So he likes liquid staking. But no, I would say, I think no, Mikel's done a good job. I would just simply say, like, yeah, staking, the core mechanism behind staking or proof of stake is really intended to add more security to the network, right? And there are obviously various ways one can do that. We've seen that with staking as a service, staking pools, solo staking, which is like, the North Star. And then, we've seen liquid staking has become like a very important demand driver, given the limitations of of staking traditionally.
Mm.
So, the motivation around liquid staking is really around, to tackle the capital inefficiency of staking and the liquidity constraints that are available. So I think that sort of paves a nice sort of context to the discussion.
Mm, right. Yeah. No, I think that puts it into perspective for sure. So obviously, you guys are active, or the projects are active in that area. So can you tell us a bit more about the project specifically? I sort of have an idea already about Bifrost because I've been more Polkadot adjacent, so to say. But yeah, perhaps also about Persistence One. Like, what is it that you do? What who are your users? And what kind of metrics can you share to kind of assess what you guys are doing and how it's going?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think so a little bit maybe of background about persistence as well. So we started building out in 2019. We were building a Cosmos app chain at the time, but for a different purpose to what it serves today. At the time, we wanted to bring real world assets on chain. We all know how difficult that is, and it moves at a pace which is definitely nothing like the how fast the crypto markets move, right? So very early on into our development cycle, we realized that this is a very challenging endeavor and it's going to take years for this to play out. And, people in this industry do not have years, so for us, we wanted to build something that was also close to what people like doing in this industry, which is more along, decentralized finance and playing around with applications that people are concerned with. So around the time of DeFi summer 2020, obviously Ethereum had insane yields, right? Like, there were like 3-4 digit APYs that people were farming at the very least. There were
Yeah.
5 digit yields as well, but let's not go there. So for us, when we saw that, and you looked at Atom, so we were building in the Cosmos ecosystem. Most of the early team members come from the Cosmos ecosystem. They were part of Game of Stakes, which helped take the Cosmos up live, incentivized testnet, all those things. So we come from like within the Cosmos ecosystem, deep Cosmos community members. So for us, we wanted to build in Cosmos. We saw that this is happening in Ethereum. And then at the same time, Atom stakers are earning like 8, 10, 12% in staking rewards. And that's just not enough, right? It
Mm.
does not spark any lively conversations, nothing. So liquid staking wasn't a very hot thing at the time either. 2020, it's still very new. Lido was going live at the time. We were building liquid staking for Atom, but Cosmos did not have any DeFi. Nothing. There was no Osmosis at the time, which is the premier DEX of Cosmos, and there was no money market. Zero. There was no IBC. IBC wasn't live at the time. IBC went live in June, if I'm not wrong, 2021. So for us to build liquid staking was super challenging. We were like, okay, how do we build this? So we decided to build our own bridge. Get it audited because bridges got hacked left, right,
Yeah.
center. At the time, actually, bridges weren't getting hacked though. But we issued STK Atom, which is the liquid stake token for Atom as an ERC20 token, and built liquidity for it on Sushi Swap. We saw decent traction, but obviously, like as an Atom holder, you're earning like, what? You're paying like $0.01 in transaction fees, even lesser at times, right?
Yeah.
And now, if you have to interact with the Ethereum blockchain, you have to pay $50, $100 in transaction fee peak bill. Nobody wants
Mm.
to do that. So we knew that this product had limitations, but it was the only way to go live at the time. So this was done through our application called PStake. PStake is the one that issues the liquid stake tokens. But we knew at the time that, okay, the vision for persistence is going to be a special purpose layer one that looks at liquid stake tokens and does everything around liquid stake tokens on the chain. So we don't want to be a general purpose layer one that competes with the likes of Solana, Near, Cosmos Hub itself. We want to be focused on liquid staking and liquid staking only. So you first part of that puzzle is to issue LSTs. we started doing that on the persistence chain in 2023 January, because until like mid 2022, although you could do liquid staking in Cosmos, you couldn't build a non-custodial solution because Cosmos did not have interchain accounts, which we can talk about. It's more on the technical side of things. But without interchain accounts, you could not control an account on the Cosmos hub from another account on another chain, which is what you had to do to make liquid staking in Cosmos work. So in Jan of 2023, we launched pStake. Soon after that, we launched Dexter, which is the DEX that focuses on liquid stake tokens. So it uses metastable pools. It has metastable pools that allow for very efficient trading between LSTs and native tokens. Makes LPing a much better experience. And then the next step, once we have sufficient liquidity, is to move on to a money market, have a money market on the chain, and a bunch of other things. But among these things, one other product that we are building on the persistent side is the restaking infrastructure for liquid staking tokens in Cosmos. So use like LSTs, any LST in Cosmos to lock it up on the persistence chain to secure other chain services in Cosmos. So the idea is very simple. Whatever you can do to generate additional yield on top of your liquid stake tokens. So maximizing yield opportunities with liquid stake tokens is what we do at Persistence.
I'll be curious to hear about the restaking part a bit later on. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. Thibault, can you tell us a bit more about Bifrost? I'm quite familiar, but you guys have been building and launching a lot of things. And yeah, can you tell us a bit about Bifrost?
Yeah, definitely. I think now there's obviously some synergies with Persistence in terms of the origination of the idea, of the story behind Bifrost. But essentially, the team had a lot of expertise in staking, right? And before Bifrost was actually even a Kusama parachain, and then becoming obviously a Polkadot parachain at the same time, the team had launched one of the very first, I'd say, first 3 or 4 liquid staking solutions for Ethereum, right? When we were still in proof of work. And that was actually a substantial part of the overall protocol's TVL, right? Represented, never close to, I would say, the Lidos, but, we were there since the inception. I'd say the idea of liquid staking. And then obviously, our focus was still very much around building on top of Polkadot. We are an Asia-based team. Polkadot was very, very hot when Gavin sort of stepped out and sort of pitched it in the East, his favorite place to have some fun. And yeah, there was a lot of traction around like, okay, the guy left Ethereum, came to Polkadot, and he's trying to build something which, Ethereum obviously has its challenges and obstacles in regards to, scalability and the future. So the team essentially received a substrate, like sort of, grant, Web3 Builders program as well. And sort of the core tenets, I think, of Bifrost are very much underpinned by, the vision of Polkadot. So we're substrate based, so the blockchain framework, which we use Bifrost. And then I'd say initially the focus, given that there are narratives, the idea of, crowd loans and parachain slot auctions and stuff was very hot. So we essentially had a very specific niche product around the crowd loans, right? Because the crowd loans, similarly to staking, there is this idea of, putting down your DOT or your Kusama to help a team win a slot, which would last, X amount of, months to years, and they would have that lockup. So we did come up with this something called the Slot Auction Liquidity Protocol, SALP, which we were working, with many teams looking to launch the parachains around, unlocking that liquidity during that lockup of the lease. So that sort of became sort of a very key part to the business, whilst we were still having, VETH live on Ethereum back then. And then obviously, as things started to build out and there was more traction and growth and more teams deploying on both Kusama and Polkadot, we then launched our liquid staking sort of protocol palette, SLP, on both networks. And the idea here, essentially, like we can go into the details as to why Polkadot and the synergies between what we see on Polkadot and Cosmos and the synergies between Persistence, Bifrost, and being a dedicated liquid staking L1 rather than, an EVM, L1 and competing as Mikhil was saying with the likes of Solana and the others. But the idea was around, okay, let's take, the hit now in terms of not being so hot to what's being seen on L1s and L2s, but tackle like the challenges that we'll see in the future. And what are those tackles? What are those challenges? We see them today, actually. Frax is going to be its own chain, right? Using the OP stack, right? Synthetics is going to go towards the OP stack as well, right? We're seeing MakerDAO, they're potentially going to their own sort of, app chain as well. So we're seeing all these different sort of, growth and transitions now, because these, issues have been now sort of realized. And we've had that in the back of our minds essentially from the start. So, we've realized that, user experience and fragmentation around that is huge. Liquidity fragmentation is huge. And then essentially for certain networks, I mean, as you are very familiar with Polkadot, there is governance, right? Decentralized governance, open gov and everything. And liquid staking and obviously staked assets, play a part in governance. So these are all sort of these different factors that we took into, into account when sort of building out Bifrost and pushing it forward. So yeah, I'll stop there for now.
Right. Yeah, lots of things to talk about there. Perhaps I'd be curious actually to hear about the synergies that you mentioned that could be there, and why you made certain decisions. Or so you mentioned synergies between Persistence One and Bifrost and things like that. Perhaps you could talk more about that.
Yeah, sure. I mean, synergies. I don't know the details of persistence, but obviously, as we know, there's always been this discussion around, Cosmos, Polkadot, and then Cosmos sort of to some extent replicating what Polkadot was looking to do, and then Cosmos coming and saying, "Oh, actually, we don't have shared security," and now they're working on shared security, which is actually something I'd like Mikhil to sort of explain, mesh security and what's happening there as well. I think that's really fascinating.
Yeah.
But essentially, what I mean in terms of synergy is this idea of like, we are a dedicated, app chain, or L1 if you want to call it, leveraging off both Polkadot on our ends, and then these guys on the Cosmos side, and we are providing one service, which is liquid staking. And we're looking at how we can make sure that our liquid staking token is sort of the canonical sort of asset that will be used going forward, which is difficult. And I guess we'll talk about like our different strategies and how we see things, but that's the idea. I mean, so I think that's where we see things. Obviously, we see things on the Polkadot side. They chose Cosmos. It'd be great to hear why as well. But the idea was about the architecture, the design there, rather than building on on Ethereum like Lido or on other chains on that front.
Right. Yeah. Perhaps Mikhil, can you tell us about why you chose Cosmos? Like what benefits you see there, but also perhaps the challenges. And Thibault mentioned the meshed security bit. Not mashed. The security is not mashed, it's meshed. And it's sort of different from Polkadot, I guess, which has its own consequences then. And yeah, I'd just be curious to hear about that a bit more from you.
Yeah, I mean, I think Thibault mentioned a lot of points that I agree with also, which is why you choose to build something on a specific chain instead of building everything on Ethereum like everyone else did. I think all of us, like, anybody who's been building in Polkadot or in Cosmos made that bet that, okay, the tech stack at some point is going to matter more than initial hype and liquidity, right? But again, we don't know if that's true, because you see with what DYDX has been able to execute, right? They went down the route of building on Starknet and then doing really well, and then coming on to their app chain, and then slowly, trying to become big enough because they already have a user base. They're already big enough. So again, we don't know if the hypothesis that, okay, you want to build in the right place before, it's
Yeah.
more tech focused than liquidity focused is the right approach. I don't know that, but for us it was kind of that reasoning as well, right? Which is like back in 2018, 2019, who was talking about bridges? Nobody cared about bridges, to be honest. Nobody thought bridges were going to get hacked ever, like 2020. I remember we were raising one around, and some of our investors asked us, okay, you're using a bridge to issue STK Atom on the Ethereum side, why do that? Simple questions. And I remember the investors themselves feeling so comfortable. Yeah, bridges don't get hacked. This is like 2020, 2020. But then you fast forward a year and a half, and everybody starts seeing things blowing up. But with IBC and with the way Polkadot is built out, it's very different, right? You don't see those problems uh, because they are built to be able to. They're built to be resilient to bridge hacks and stuff like that, right? So again, for us it was the idea of bridging. It was the idea of being a sovereign chain, because at the time, again, when we made this decision was purely from a real world asset play, which is, okay, we're building a commodities marketplace on our marketplace application now. these traders, these institutions, they don't want all their information on a public ledger either, right? They want
Mm.
a little bit of privacy. So how do we bake in that privacy? You cannot have that on, if you build on the EVM, right? So those were the like factors in our decision making. And I mean, for us, I do think the decisions were right in terms of the technical aspects. Now, whether they've been right from a liquidity, from a market standpoint, nobody knows that today, and it's still early to say. But for us, we've kind of heads down been building here, like the same as what Thibault said for Bifrost. So it's pretty much the same thing here as well.
Mm. Right. Right.
I mean, and
Um,
to answer the second part of what you were
yeah.
asking, which is on the security side, right? Like Cosmos has different security mechanisms, that shared security. I know, this is something that Polkadot was very big on, and Cosmos kind of picked it up from there. The idea was, again, more along the lines of restaking, right? Which is what now restaking is such a big hype in the Ethereum ecosystem.
Mm.
But it's actually an idea that has been taken from different ecosystems, right? And you could say whether it's from Polkadot, Cosmos, wherever it comes from, right? I think these two ecosystems have always been at the forefront of technology and building. So, for example, with interchain security, it allows the entire Cosmos Hub validator set to be replicated onto another chain. So, this is interchain security V1, which is called replicated security. So, if today you want to launch your own chain, you don't have to go through the hassle of reaching out to 150 validators and be like, hey guys, could you please run a validator node on our chain? And you will need to have delegations in the form of the native token of your chain. None of that. You just have to go to the Cosmos Hub and be like, guys, we'll share X amount of revenue that our chain generates in return for the economic security of the entire Cosmos Hub being replicated onto my new chain. So all the
Mm.
validators on the Cosmos Hub spin up a validator node on my new chain, and the entire, let's say, the Cosmos Hub's market cap is 4 bill. The staked value is, let's say, 2.5 bill. The 2.5 bill security comes in, economic security comes in to secure my new chain. So that's ICS V1. Then you have other versions, ICS V2, which is partial set security, where you're like, okay, I don't need $2.5 billion worth of security for my chain. Why do I need that much, right? Maybe just 500 mil is good enough. So you then convince a few validators in the Cosmos Hub to run a validator node on your chain,
Mm.
and you're getting security, but in a partial manner. Then you have different forms of security. Now this is ICS, which is a core product offering of the Cosmos Hub itself. Then you have mesh security, where you can have, let's say, XPRT is persistence is native token. You have XPRT, you have Osmo, you have, for example, UIDX. You could have XPRT staked on the Osmosis chain to secure Osmosis. You can have Osmo DYDX staked on the persistence chain to secure the persistence chain. So you can have these different formats where it's a mesh structure where any asset can be used to secure any other chain within the Cosmos ecosystem. So the collective value, economic security value, keeps on increasing as more assets come into play.
Mm.
So that's a little bit on mesh security. Now you have ethos coming in, bringing security from Ethereum, from Eigenlayer to
Mm.
Cosmos. So yeah, there's different forms. I do think, although there's pros and cons to all of this. I think ICS in itself is not the best model. One is because it doesn't lead to much value accrual to the Cosmos Hub itself, to the Atom token, right? Because why did chains have high inflation to begin with? Because they didn't generate enough revenue. So if a
Mm.
chain is not generating revenue, how are they going to share 20% of their revenue with the Cosmos Hub and make it sustainable, right? It's not going to happen. So
Right.
again, the security models are good from theory perspective. From practicality perspective, I don't think the Cosmos has cracked it either. Yeah.
Right. Right. I noticed there've been some efforts there in terms of Atom 2.0, and I think it was quite controversial and
Yeah.
like fights on X going
Yeah.
on about that. But perhaps just regarding restaking, because I know you guys also do restaking is also a part of what you do at Persistence One, or intend to do.
Yeah.
And how does that fit into that whole thing? What does that look like? Because, for example, in Polkadot, there's the shared security, right? So I wouldn't intuitively come up with a way where Bifrost, for example, could do some sort of restaking to bootstrap economic security for other chains, because technically you can launch parachains and they inherit the economic security of Polkadot, right? So I don't know what use case there is for some sort of restaking.
It's still a form of restaking because the dot that is staked on the chain is guarding other chains in some way or
Right.
the other.
Yeah, but then I wouldn't see why there would need to be a different system next to it, right? Where you would, for example, take the liquid staking token, the V dot, maybe, I think, right, and use that to bootstrap some sort of chain. But can you talk about that, Thibault? Is restaking at all something that is relevant to Bifrost? And Mikhil, maybe afterwards you can tell us how restaking fits into your platform.
Yeah. Yeah, sure. I mean, I'm not the restaking expert, and I look forward to have a few questions for Mikhil actually on that front. But what I think is already fascinating is EtherFi, which is a liquid restaking protocol, has a larger market cap than Lido, which is obviously already quite hilarious,
Yeah.
in terms of just to show you the hype around liquid restaking, which is insane.
Yeah. It sort of feels like the derivative is worth more than the original asset kind of thing, which is something in TradFi when there's a lot of speculation,
I mean, I just think in terms of if you look at the TVL right now of, liquid staking, it's about 60 billion, right? The TVL of restaking is about 13 billion, right? And out of the 60 billion, which is, essentially, I would call it half Lidos, and there's actually, exactly, a bit more. There's so much revenue going in and stuff. They've got the monopoly, and then you look at EtherFi, which is I don't even know if they're potentially the largest in the liquid restaking space, but they have a bigger valuation than Lido, which actually have a product, and have a bigger market. I mean, whatever. That's just to give you a bit of an idea of how hot the narrative is.
Yeah.
And I live in the East, right? And a lot of the guys, in terms of the liquidity, the LPs behind, whether they're the ones signing the checks or the ones actually playing around on Eigenlayer and, playing around with the LRTs are coming from Asia rather than from the US. At least those are the discussions I've had with a lot of the VCs. A lot of the whole narratives around liquid restaking and Eigenlayer has come from Asia rather than the US. As well as the BTC sort of DeFi L2 stuff we're seeing as well, and liquid restaking that we're seeing now on Bitcoin DeFi, which anyways, so that's just to give the audience and everybody an understanding of that. Liquid restaking and restaking is super interesting, but I think that, as Mikhil was saying, what Ethos are doing is very interesting between Eigenlayer and Cosmos, but I guess coming to your question now, regarding Bifrost, I think, look, obviously, the idea around restaking is something that we've looked at, given that we do have a liquid staking asset on Ethereum. So there are things that could be done there directly. Unfortunately, the TVL of our liquid staking on Ethereum, has dramatically decreased, given that we were one of the very first liquid staking protocols to, allow withdrawals just after Shapella, which, to an extent made sense that other people were going for more attractive options. But we are talking to teams, around how potentially we could look at this sort of, security aggregation between different proof of stake networks, right? So we have looked at the guys at Babylon, the Bitcoin side, and how they're potentially looking at, securing other, POSs with Bitcoin collateral. They're doing that obviously with a few other chains right now. So we are looking at sort of the utility and use cases around how, our assets could be used within that. But it's not something that we're actively pushing forward, and it's part of our product offering. It's more about synergies and whether or not there is value to add on that front, and not increasing any sort of risks or whatever.
Right. Interesting. So I got you now, I think. So you were saying in terms of EtherFi, EtherFi is a restaking focused project, and the token's market cap is higher than the market cap of the token of Lido, which is a liquid staking project and has a way higher TVL. Right?
Basically, that's correct. Yeah, that's correct. Yeah, 100%.
That's because it's the meta. That's the narrative. You got to be in restaking.
I know, man. And I mean, I've got to say, look, I mean, like, as I said, I don't know too much, so I'll give a bit my thought, and then obviously, Mikhil, please jump in, and I
Yeah.
guess I have questions that will come from that. But like, LRTs and LSTs, for the audience, so liquid restaking tokens and liquid staking tokens, like they're going after the same market essentially, right? It's just a different
Yeah.
product solving a different problem essentially. I think LSTs, they're homogeneous, and they're doing the same things in different ways. They're securing the network, and they don't really compete that much on yield. It's more about like the utility of the asset, how much it can be used, and its moneyness across DeFi and on-chain finance. I think on the liquid restaking side, where I'm really keen to hear your perspective, Mikhil, is around the the AVSs, right? So, I mean, I guess maybe we can maybe give some sort of context to that.
Yeah.
I think him being the expert, he can break that down. But I'm keen to understand like how you guys look at that, the AVSs, because as I just said earlier, like you're on the opposite side of the spectrum, right? LRTs are not heterogeneous, right? In terms of design, in terms of operations, in terms of their underlying. The collateral can be different, in terms of like which LSTs you're using. You could accept a bunch of LSTs plus the base asset. And there's a different selection method around the AVSs and all of that. So it's very different. So I'm really keen to understanding first, like your views about restaking and liquid restaking, and then like how you're seeing the market.
Very good questions. I think maybe taking it step by step, I would maybe start off with a little bit of clarification also in terms of what we are doing, right? Like our objective is not to issue the liquid restake token. That's the most important thing. So there's liquid staking, there's restaking, and there's liquid restake token issuance, right? So for us, the objective is very much like what Eigenlayer is doing within Ethereum, where they pool security, and then however that security, whatever the demand for that security is, right? Eigenlayer allows people to pull that security from the shared security pool. The question with liquid, again, I do agree with you that the markets are very like weird in the sense that, okay, although on a long enough time horizon markets do become efficient, like liquid restake tokens having like EtherFi being valued more than Lido. Again, I'm not a financial advisor, but I would say that's just nuts. That's crazy because Lido has been going at it for the longest amount of time. It's probably the most secure product out there, has had like tens of audits on every single upgrade they have. And you look at EtherFi, it's the hype around liquid restake tokens, right? That's it. There's nothing more to that. Now the question again, I kind of started talking about it when I was previously speaking as well. So the AVSs, or the demand for security, where does that come from? That comes from chains that want security. Now, who wants security? The question is, like, do chains even want security that much? Is economic security that big of a thing as well? I do think it's similar to the bridge part that we talked about, where in the past we thought, oh, bridge hacks are not going to happen. It's not, like, that has never happened. And now people say, oh, economic security hacks are not going to happen either. But at some point it may start happening. So you have to be prepared for that, in the sense that, okay, you want to be prepared for a situation where somebody comes in, does a governance attack, has a lot of your tokens, chain's tokens, so can pull out. If your chain has 100 million TVL and 20 mil worth of chain security, you're in a vulnerable spot then. So there will be demand for security, but how much can like if let's say there's a new chain that launches and wants to borrow security from a shared security, from a restaking pool, how much are they going to pay for it? That is my bigger concern, which is where I think it's not going to be sustainable. Now, a lot of people, I've heard people say that Eigenlayer is going to add another 3% yield to Ethereum staking yields. I don't know where that 3% yield is going to come from, whether it's going to come from inflationary tokens. So if a new chain launches and does 20% in inflation and gives away that 20% inflation to the restaking pool,
the quality of the yield, the sustainability of the yield. Yeah,
correct. So I don't think that's going to be very sustainable for us. The objective, and again, the reason why we are building the restaking product as well, is very unique to, it's not why Eigenlayer is building restaking in Ethereum. Their idea is, in a way, it's about, oh, there's so many services that are going to launch that will need the security. For us, it's about how do we cater to Atom holders, for example, because Atom holders are very unique. They don't care about using Atom or Atom LSTs as collateral in a money market, and borrow against it. They're not degens. What they are most comfortable with is staking. The risks that they
Yeah.
understand best is slashing. That's all. Like, oh,
Yeah.
if there's a downtime slashing of like 0.01%, there's a double slash penalty of 5%. I'm okay with that 5% slashing risk. Now, if you do restaking, you can allow people to earn additional yield on top of their liquid staking yields. And this is still, the risks are still the same. You're not creating, obviously, there's another layer of risk for sure, but it's a type of risk that the atom holder is comfortable with. So that's
Mm.
where we come from. That's the idea. Again, do there will be different types of AVSs, I believe. I think, in today's context, I do think there'll be just newer chains who would want to launch an app chain and would want to borrow security, but the demand for security is going to be high. But the supply side is so big today. You have Ethos, you have Babylon, you have the Cosmos hub itself offering ICS. So I think in tomorrow's context, what we'll see is consumer chains consuming security from different avenues, not just one. You're already starting to see that now, by the way. Like, Cosmos hub is going to be secured, is going to borrow security from Bitcoin that Babylon has, for example. But Cosmos hub
Mhm.
is in itself in a business of supplying security. So Cosmos hub has its own security, will borrow security from Babylon, and then will provide it to 10 other consumer chains. Similarly,
Mm.
every consumer chain would want various, security to come from various different angles. They would want it to come from liquid restake tokens. They'd want it to come from, like BTC security, ETH security through Ethos. So I do think there'll be demand, but those would be like chains within Cosmos. That's our target market. But the most important thing for us is to offer, like, sustainable but like comfortable yields to LST holders in Cosmos, because you don't see Cosmos LSTs picking up as much as you see in Ethereum or Solana. It's such a difficult market when you look at, and it's not just about. We can argue that, oh, there's Cosmos doesn't have a DeFi ecosystem. It does actually today. It has a decently good DeFi ecosystem. Why are people still not using it? It's because the holders, they don't care about using those products. You have to build for those users, for those holders. So that's kind of what we are doing.
Right.
If I
So
can jump in,
yeah, sure.
I thought something. I mean, look, obviously, I'm a user. I mean, I'm obviously playing around with Cosmos and stuff like that. But I think what's still quite interesting with Cosmos is obviously the guys behind, Sommelier Finance, Osmosis. These guys are somewhat driving, DeFi and sort of innovation and some sort of opportunity sets as well for sort of to revive Cosmos. And I mean, I think where you guys were quite lucky. When I say you guys, I mean Cosmos as an ecosystem, is that airdrops, which are super super hot for the retail user and I guess average user as well, is a lot of atom sort of stakers were sort of somewhat rewarded generous and very well performing airdrops, the likes of
Mm.
Celestia. And then obviously, that's become sort of a great way to bring people in as well. I do have to say that there is a lot of like cool products on Cosmos. So I mean, I think we stand in a sort of similar situation on Polkadot as you're mentioning, Mikhil. I think within Polkadot, and this is something we're trying to break down as much as we can. It is that mentality around just staking, and how just staking adds absolutely no value to the ecosystem. Of course, it guarantees more security, and when you have the optionality of having a liquid staking, protocol, you should be, as a de facto measure, potentially considering the liquid staking protocol there, because I mean, I think the security guarantees of a liquid staking protocol, especially on our ends, are pretty clear, right? I think the real problems are potentially consensus attack
Yeah.
or slashing, right? That's the big one. And I mean, as you mentioned, like the teams have been going for 3-4 years now. There's audits, etc., etc. So I would argue like every ecosystem has obviously its own issues. But yeah, on the Polkadot side, if I have to bring the conversation back to Polkadot, is really the idea around having to educate the users, and also having more people build interesting options and opportunities there. Whereas we've seen, as you said, DYDX, they moved to you guys. Celestia, obviously they're tightly knit to Cosmos and Babylon as well. The Bitcoin whole narrative as well. And Eigenlayer have decided to work very clearly with IBC, and Ethos is one of the first sort of actively validated services, leveraging off that as well. So it's all quite interesting.
Yeah, the most interesting thing, like when you say this, Ethos is one of the first AVSs. The craziest thing is the first AVS is actually a service to provide security to other chains, that borrows from IBS.
Exactly.
There's some irony in there.
Gotta keep the
most
ball
definitely.
rolling.
All about narratives.
Yeah, gotta keep printing the inflation and provide the yield. Right. Perhaps it would make sense to talk about the use cases of these liquid staking tokens that you provide. I think that's something that matters as well. I mean, is it only the sort of optionality that you give a holder, which would be, okay, now my staked dot, and let's say, is liquid, and I could technically sell it in a pool and have quicker access to this liquidity, or is there more to it? Are there other use cases? Can you talk about that a bit?
Is that for me, right? Okay.
Yeah. Well, for both of you.
Yeah, I mean, okay, cool. Yeah, I'll start it off then. I mean, I definitely think, look, as we said earlier, right, the idea behind liquid staking is really to tackle the issues around, capital efficiency or inefficiency of staking and liquidity. So lowest hanging fruit is really that, right? So, you're obviously going to see, having access to your liquidity, so swapping, in and out. Obviously, sometimes there is a queue, but which is, I would say, on our end, is faster than the 28-day window of Polkadot. We've recently seen that with amounts of I would say about $700,000 to $1 million. That could be redeemed in like a couple of days. Without a fee. Not swapping, but just redeeming via our queuing mechanism. So I definitely think that liquidity. So pools are important on DEXs. Stable AMMs. And then I think the biggest use case is obviously, at least what we've seen, and we've seen on Ethereum, we've seen in Solana, and we're seeing it in other ecosystems, is around leverage staking. So obviously looping the collateral, borrowing against the base asset, and then sort of accumulating your staking rewards and leveraging on that. And then as well, I mean, there's just basically just lending and borrowing, right? There are people out there who actually need to get permissionless, decentralized lending and borrowing of an asset for another, for an actual real life use case, and we've seen that. So I think if you look at the biggest DeFi categories, we're very much in liquid staking being the first, restaking in the top 10, and then there's obviously lending which is just underneath liquid staking. So those are really the big ones. I think on our ends, if we are to speak specific to Polkadot, like we are trying to sort of activate these very primitive use cases which are not even present yet. I mean, you're familiar with that. So on our end, it's really around the utility of liquid staking assets, not only on Bifrost, but leveraging off XCM and seeing how we can use that asset across the ecosystem, right? And trying to bootstrap DeFi TVL not only on Polkadot substrate or on EVM, on Astar and Moonbeam and the others. And we've seen some really cool stuff. If I just give you one example, like Hydra, which has now become sort of a very sort of important hub on Polkadot. They've provided a really cool and seamless way for people who are holding DOT or VDOT, the liquid stake derivative of DOT, and being able to DCA into other long tail assets in the ecosystem with their DOT staking rewards, which I think is quite compelling. As we sort of move towards core time and away from the parachain models, VDOT would be potentially a currency for purchasing and trading, core time, but also, why not even use the DOT staking rewards for teams to be able to buy, future block space. So I think, we are trying to sort of go ahead and sort of allow, the ecosystem to sort of, interact with these very basic use cases that we're seeing elsewhere. On Polkadot, it's taking a bit more time. I don't think, Polkadot is super, super sexy compared to other ecosystems in terms of what can be done, but that's something we're trying to sort of change as well with a few teams. And then stable coins, right? We're seeing that HydraDX will also push for a stable coin in the next quarter, where potentially the collateral asset behind that would be a yield-bearing asset like a liquid staking token. So that's sort of the things we're up to. But I think maybe the last point I wanted to mention before handing off to Mikhil is really around Bifrost, I think, where we're slightly different to other liquid staking protocols out there, is we've been able to ensure that DOT, which is an important asset within the ecosystem, specifically on the governance side, OpenGov, we've been able to make sure that people who have their DOT staked and with their receipt token VDOT, they're still able to use that DOT in OpenGov. So VDOT is your voucher token around liquidity, and still accumulating staking rewards whilst being able to use it in DeFi, but also has the ability to retain its governance rights, and you can use VDOT in governance. So you're accumulating the staking rewards, you're locking it just for the governance, for the referendum, but you can do that as well. And I don't think that's something which any other protocol out there has been able to do in regards to the governance side of things, which are also quite important for certain ecosystems.
Not just for Polkadot. I think nobody has done it for any other ecosystem as well. This is a feature we've looked into very deeply in Cosmos. Very difficult to build out, given the nature of the assets being on so many chains, right, in different pools. So it's definitely very complicated. So yeah, I think that's a very interesting feature to have. Yeah.
Cool.
I can maybe go ahead and share from our side. Obviously, very similar. I think we have like a list of protocols where we are integrated, but STK Atom, for example, is one LST that we issue. We also issue STK Osmo, STK DYDX, and we also want to go after other assets within Cosmos, mostly strategic. Like for example, Bad Kids are most hyped NFTs that come from Cosmos, right? But they are issued on the Stargaze chain. So doing liquid staking for stars, for example, for us, if you're a Cosmos based chain and you do not mess around with the staking logic of the chain, we can support that chain, liquid staking for that chain in less than a week. Even the week is more for us to do some testing and make sure we're doing things properly. But it's very quick from our side to support other chains. So we want to go after chains that have strategic alignment to us, where we see the cultural alignment, like which is in the case of Stargaze, or where we see synergies. So STK Atom, for example, is integrated onto Dexter, which is our own DEX. It's on Astroport, which is the DEX on Neutron, which is a Cosmos Hub consumer chain. We have STK Atom liquidity on Osmosis. STK Atom is available on Mars protocol. Again, similar to what Thibault talked about, which is looping of your collateral, and then leverage liquid staking is what we call it, to generate higher staking rewards. And then you have Shade protocol, where you can, again, it's on the secret network ecosystem, so privacy preserving ecosystem, where you can do privacy preserved stuff with your liquid staked Atom. You have STK Atom can be used to mint stable coins. So stable coins like Silk, which is a stable coin, again issued by Shade protocol in the secret network ecosystem. So privacy preserving stable coin. We have other stable coins in Cosmos. IST, for example, Inter protocol built by Agoric. The proposal for enabling STK Atom as a collateral asset to mint IST is gonna be live very soon. The major chunk of the work is done. It's available in the Kujira ecosystem. So, like again, STK Atom, for example, is integrated pretty much everywhere in Cosmos. The perps integration with Lavana is waiting one chain upgrade on our side, which is going to happen in the first week of April. So the use cases that you could cover as a broad spectrum of like use cases for LSTs, they're all there. The one big use case that we want to build, not just for LSTs that we issue ourselves, but also LSTs issued by any other protocol within Cosmos, whether it's Milky Way for Milk Tia, you have ST Osmo, any of these assets can be restaked on the persistence chain to create additional yield. That's one big use case we want to build ourselves. And then if there's a liquid restaking protocol that wants to build on top of persistence, they can do that and issue an LRT. So those are the different use cases we are looking at. And I think even with these current use cases that we have, it doesn't change the user behavior, or at the end of the day, it's who holds atoms and these other tokens. They decide what they want to do with it, whether they want to use it in these different products or not. I see that there are interesting opportunities within Cosmos to use these products. Not enough appetite yet. So, like Thibault, you said Polkadot is not the most sexy ecosystem right now. I do think Cosmos is a sexy ecosystem to build an app chain in. it's a sexy ecosystem if you want to build your own app chain and you want to say, oh, I'm not affiliated with a Cosmos hub, right? You have Say
Mm.
doing that. Say does not market it as part of the Cosmos family, or neither does Injective. But they've all leveraged that whatever they've built. The tech stack is still the tech stack that they've
Cosmos system.
leveraged from the Cosmos ecosystem. So to build an app chain, you can do that, and it'll still be sexy if you keep some distance. But assets like Atom, even Osmo, haven't done really well so far. But I do think that's going to change at some point in the near future, right? So, because there are so many things happening now with Atom Wars, for example, protocol owned liquidity. If you want that, Cosmos Hub has a big enough community pool. If you want to use the community pool Atom for something, you can request for it by participating in Atom Wars. So there are different exciting pieces that are also coming into play very soon. There's very exciting new products like LS that are going to launch very soon. So there's too many things happening in Cosmos. It's just that the consolidated push that you need to like really have the ecosystem propel,
Mm.
that's still missing a little bit. But the moment you get that, it's all going to be like, wow,
Mm.
why did this not happen earlier?
Right.
Yeah, I
I guess
agree with that actually. And I think similarly, we've seen the same thing as Polkadot, like start with Madara, Polkadot SDK. We've looked at Avail DA, using Substrate, Cardano as well. So the tech is there. It's just whether or not you want to associate yourself to that name tag, because potentially they might say, well, 2019 was cool. It was the hot play in town, but we're in 2024 now, and what the hell's going on there? I mean, I guess we are fine. We're still very much Polkadot aligned. We're leveraging off the security and obviously the resources available. We still think that that there's a lot of like intellectual capital there. It's just a question about like working together. We've seen now a big of a shift in the treasury sort of governance. There's been more activism and more sort of active uses of treasury funds. I mean, I'll just briefly say it, like we've successfully requested a liquidity loan via the dot treasury, which was about 500,000 dot, where we were requesting like, look guys, we need 500,000 dot for sort of liquidity for, V dot and dot, so that, the exchanging and swapping of the asset is done sort of very, seamlessly. It's going to be repaid. The loan will be repaid plus the staking rewards on that dot back to the treasury. We're seeing Hydra DX, asking for a million dot in incentives, which they'll be using in terms of, V dot and using the dot staking rewards for their pools. So I guess the point I'm saying is, like, to one extent the tech is there. To another extent, it's for projects as well to sort of kickstart, more of that, engagement. But then more importantly is, you need to be on top of the right narratives. And I think at the end of the day, that's sort of something which we may have not been so good at as a whole collectively in Polkadot.
Right. Thank you for sharing that. As I know you guys have a hard stop soon, I would really like to talk about risks as well, because I think that's important to viewers too, and perhaps something that can be overlooked a bit. Just to kick it off, I mean, for example, like you can play this derivative game, right? Which sort of a liquid staking token is a derivative of the staked token. You can play this kind of into infinity. You can create derivative on derivative on derivative, and we kind of have seen that in TradFi, right, in 2008. And sometimes it feels like we are rebuilding the same thing in Web3. I mean, you got like Eigenlayer, then the restaking token and the airdrops, and everyone's farming, and so people can fall for this illusion, I think, that value is created from thin air, and they're sort of unlocking new capital when they aren't. Because the underlying asset exists only once, right? For example, Warren Buffett, a quote of his on derivatives was financial weapons of mass destruction. So especially when it comes to leverage, it can be tricky, right? So, for example, one thing I'd be interested to hear about from you, Thibault, is also like the leverage staking. Now you can have like a one-click way to add kind of leverage into the equation, which carries risks. How do you make sure that you manage this and users are aware of it? And then the other thing is, how liquid are your LST markets or pools? So let's say if the token is used for leverage, you're staking, you receive the liquid staking token, you use it as collateral for a loan on a lending protocol. Let's say there's some sort of market shock. VDOT has, in this case, the liquid staking token, has to be liquidated, but the market is not liquid enough. There's no buyers, and there's then a substantial loss, that's incurred because of that. So just like your thoughts on leverage, liquidity, and contagion risks. Both of you, perhaps Thibault, you can go first.
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I'll take a step back because I think there's been a lot of confusion here. So, I mean, LSDs, right, as a marketing play, as in on the term LSD, I think that was really nice and catchy, very sexy. It was cool. A bit silly, but yeah. But I think essentially, Liquid Collective, right, which is a collective of parties within sort of the staking world, Alluvial, a few others, came out and said, look, guys, we need to be taken seriously, right? And we need to have some sort of definition which works so that when we go to Washington or whatever, the regulatory bodies can understand that if we go in and say liquid staking derivative, well, that's going to just kill us, right? Because they're going to obviously associate that to derivatives that we see in TradFi, right? So they've gone along the lines of LSTs, right, which we've changed now. So sort of these receipt tokens. I think one thing to firstly understand, I mean, when you look at just the definition of what derivatives are, I mean, they're contracts, right, between two or more parties, okay? And there's an underlying asset, but in most cases, it's a group of assets, or it can be a benchmark or whatever, but it's between two or more parties. And I think that the misconception there is when you are looking at liquid staking tokens, yes, it's the user and you've got the protocol, and itself, you could say the protocol is the risk, right? But essentially, that's a risk that you take in any sort of investment, setting. Then it's a question of the team. Have you done your due diligence? Have they basically done robust audits? How long have they been in the market for? What's their track record? What's the liquidity? What's the overall TVL and all of that stuff? So I think that the derivatives analogy to liquid staking tokens is completely wrong. So that sort of should put an end to that sort of, I think, long-standing reasoning or whatever, as it's not a contract in that same way. Now, for sure, if there is a market shock or something, there is obviously there's going to be a lot of people who are going to walk out the exit at the same time, and that's when the design mechanisms of these different protocols are different. So yeah, having more liquidity is obviously important. So I think that's the first sort of bit of context in regards to how I think that this thought about derivatives and LSTs is sort of misleading. In regards to leverage staking, I mean, leverage staking in itself, I guess this strategy is not new, right? It's been done on the Ethereum side for a while, right? Where you're just trying to leverage up your staking yield, and you need for it to make sense, and for it to still be in the money and not be paying more borrowing, cost than the staking yield that you're inherently getting. I think where we're different, and I think this is one thing we wanted to do. So the product itself is called Loop Stake, and the idea is one click. So what we mean by that is everything in terms of managing your position, your loan to value, the flash loans, and everything, all the mechanisms behind the guidelines and the risk framework is very much done in the back end, and it's coded. And we've done it in a way where a retail user obviously has to understand the risks of leverage, but the leverage parameters have not been done in a degen way where you're looking to be blown out, right? We've been quite sort of risk averse on that front. So I think the idea here was basically say, look, guys, leverage staking is not new. It's something that's existed. However, how we're coming on about it is very similar, is very different in the same way that we want to have a one-click product where the lending and the borrowing mechanism is done in the back end. That's sort of the protocol itself, which is dealing. All you have to basically do is you have to provide the base asset, and then you can set your parameters. And it's done very transparently in terms of what is the staking yield, what is the simulation of what is currently the borrowing rate, and where does it make sense. And we have some guidelines in there in regards to to assure that users understand the risk and they're not liquidated or they get rugged or whatever. So that was sort of the key product discussions we had before sort of launching and going forward with this product. So yeah, I mean, I'll stop there. I don't know if I've covered everything, and if Mikhil, you want to jump in as well. I think you guys do something similar as well. So
yeah, I mean, I do agree with everything you've just said. I generally see that misconception in terms of the derivative and the liquid stake token, aspect itself. Again, I think you can keep creating newer, liquid stake tokens, liquid restake tokens. Tomorrow there's, another layer on top of it. I do think at the end of the day, the risk sits with, at least the major chunk of risk sits at the base protocol layer, right? Which is the staking at the underlying layer. If the peers chain itself is attacked, that would affect every layer of, of this thing. But on the flip side, the first layer may not affect the second layer or the third layer, right? If you come from top to bottom. So again, also depends on, like, for example, in the case of restaking, now a liquid restaking protocol may be very risk averse, right? Because if you're running a strategy where you secure 5 AVSs, like you provide security to 5 AVSs, these generate a cumulative of 10% yield. But you can secure 20 and the yield becomes 12.5%. Now, would that make sense for you to go from 5 to 20 to just get that 2.5% additional yield? So it all depends on, because then you have like you're taking slashing risks on 20 different AVSs, right? So every AVS that gets slashed, you're getting slashed as well. So again, like, the risks you can still mitigate at every layer of, of the whatever you call it, every layer of the stack. And yeah, I think there are risks for sure. I do think liquid stake tokens at this point in the market cycle, they have established themselves to be fairly resilient, unless there's an infinite mint attack that happens, which is the biggest risk with any liquid restaking protocol. Restaking, we are yet to see how that's going to play out, right? Every cycle we see something, like for example Ethena. People can argue that that comes with a lot of risks also. It's a very smart product.
Yeah.
But there are people who say that, okay, what if Athena's open interest is above a certain percentage of the market, right? Then there are, would you be able to
Yeah.
unwind your position, whatnot, right? So different risks. I do think these products all make sense in the current stage that they are. But again, the more degenerative stuff that you try to do with it, that's where the risks become like, contagion risks.
Yeah, just gotta be
And
careful.
can I just add?
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say also one thing to just consider is that, I mean, if we talk about liquid staking and liquid restaking, given that it was part of the topic of the call today, I mean, liquid staking, you're looking at two underlying correlated assets to some extent, right? There is like clear correlation between the two. And I would say that then it's a question of the user understanding, which one you're favoring in terms of its design, in terms of liquid staking protocols. But then also more importantly is, it's down to risk preference. Like, I wouldn't necessarily, go into the LRTs without understanding like the AVSs, the designs, what's being used as collateral there in terms of the underlying LRT design. And then potentially I wouldn't be looking at using LRTs as, collateral on whatever, So I think, there's vanilla and then there's obviously more exotic stuff. But I think liquid staking, in essence, like as we spoke since the beginning, I think, yeah, it's a question of, if there's a market event, if there's slashing, and if there's consensus attacks, those are sort of the prominent, issues. And then, of course, there might be depeg risks on specific liquidity pools and stuff like that. But it's the rehypothecation of assets is something that is obviously very common. But then again, I think the beauty of obviously what we're working on, in terms of on-chain finance, is the idea of the ledger, the transparency around that, your counterparties, and being able to track that as well. And the rules which are set, within the protocols as well.
Right. Lovely. Well, lovely exchange of ideas, guys. I hope there will be more collaboration between Cosmos-based and Polkadot-based projects in the future. And as we all have sort of like the same vision of a decentralized interoperable future. So I'm sure there are a lot of synergies to be had, and it doesn't have to be zero sum. On that note, Mikhil, to wrap up, perhaps what can kind of Cosmos learn from Polkadot? And Thibault, maybe you can share your thoughts on the in the other direction. And just for the viewers as well, if you want to get involved and start liquid staking, if you're an Atom user or Dot user or want to become one, we'll put the links to Persistence One and Bifrost in the show notes for you to get started.
I think, first of all, thank you, Sohel. Very nicely hosted, call. Really enjoyed this. So I would say one thing that Cosmos can definitely learn from Polkadot is more along the lines of like, pushing value to the chain and the token and everything as well. I think Polkadot definitely does a better job than Cosmos at that. Cosmos is all about, everything else, but teams do not work towards one unified mission. I think Polkadot still has a lot of teams that work towards, doing well for Dot. Cosmos has a lot of teams that want to do well for themselves and not for Atom. So a little bit of that would definitely make a big difference, I think. I mean, people would argue that Dot has the same problem, but based on what I've seen, it's slightly better than Atom for sure.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, so I would take the opposite side there, and I'd say, we do need some teams to lead, the ecosystem. Unfortunately, I mean, I don't have to put my Bifrost hat here, but I can speak as a user. We've seen teams which were very successful in terms of parachain auctions when they were hot, the likes of Parallel Finance, Akala, who were leading, I would say, the narrative around Polkadot. And there was a lot of hype, specifically on the investor side. I think, they just unfortunately did not handle the hype very well, and they've sort of, somewhat provided a bit of a difficult path ahead for us, given that some names were brand names, if you want to call them. So I think it requires some teams to sort of lead the forefront of that. And I think that's what we're trying to do on the liquid staking DeFi side, HydraDX as well. And we're seeing other exciting teams on Polkadot who are trying to lead certain narratives. So I think what we need essentially is to learn from Cosmos in terms of, some teams leading and as well bringing some sort of experimentation as well. And I think, Cosmos have done very well in terms of that community and the tribalism there in regard to, experimentation, and also I would say bringing, certain narratives to the Cosmos sort of forefront. We gave the example of Babylon, Eigenlayer as well. I mean, whether it adds value fundamentally, I don't really care, as long as it brings more people in and more teams to build between these two sort of ecosystems is where the value is.
Guys, thank you so much. Happy to have you on anytime again.
Thanks for your time, guys. Have a good one.